With Rudolf Nureyev, a documentary on Dame Margot at 9 this Saturday night, followed by Josephine Baker, Chasing a Rainbow, the story of this mother of 12 adopted children, one of the first nude dancers at the Folies Bergère, 4 times married, a symbol of new freedom for women, intimate friend of monarchs and dictators. Chasing a Rainbow, a documentary on the life of Josephine Baker this Saturday night on Channel 32, 10:30. Each and every Thursday night on Channel 32, we present 2 perspectives of civilization. The first, Jacob Bronowski's critically acclaimed history of human beings and its intellectual development as a race, Ascent of Man, our accomplishments over the last 2 million years, every Thursday evening, 8 to 9 o'clock. That's followed by The Africans. It's a personal viewpoint of the history of Africa and shows the conflict between the indigenous, the Islamic, and the Western cultures. The Africans, a personal viewpoint of the history and future of Africa, 9 o'clock, Thursday nights here on Channel 32. It's Channel 32 you're watching, KQEC San Francisco.
Ciao, I'm Marianne Esposito, and today I'm in a very special place called Whitebird Farm in New London, New Hampshire. It's the home of artist-author Tommy DePaola. Now, Tommy knows the story about how a classic bread from Milano came to be. It's called panettone, and it's made in a flower pot. Emilio, ciao.
Hi, Marianne. Welcome to Emilio.
Oh.
How are you? How's it going?
Good, good.
Boy, let's go. Boy, where have you been?
I bet you thought I was going to do this in the pasta machine. Well, surprise, surprise. I had to listen to my grandmother in order to figure out how to do this, too. So when I had to get up bright and early and run to the refrigerator. Ciao.
Funding for Ciao Italia is made possible by a grant from Arricchio Cheese. For generations, the Big A, topped by an anchor, has been the symbol of our commitment to quality and consistency. Arricchio, classic Italian cheeses. And King Arthur Flour of Norwich, Vermont, distributors of unbleached all-purpose flour. King Arthur Flour, dedicated to the pure joy of baking for 200 years.
Tommy DePaola knew when he was 4 years old that he would grow up to write and illustrate books. From his Italian father and his Irish mother, Tommy also learned to love cooking. One of his favorite recipes is for panettone, and in his book called Tony's Bread, he tells the story of how it came to be.
Tony began to work. Day after day, he experimented until he had mixed the lightest, richest dough with as many raisins and as much candied fruit as he could put into it. Now he was ready to bake. He sent word to Angelo in Milano that he should come to the bakery the next afternoon. Then he set out the dough in large bowls and went to bed. As Tony slept, the dough began to rise and rise and rise. The next morning, he filled every pan in his shop. One piece of dough was left over, so he threw it in a flower pot and baked it, too. And there it is. Look at that. Isn't that wonderful?
Hey, boy, that's really unusual in the flower pot.
Right.
I'm in Tommy DePaola's kitchen today.
And Marianne, welcome a nella mia cucina.
Oh, now, what I want to know is, how did you come to write a story about panettone in a flower pot?
Well, you know, one of my great loves is retelling a folk tale and legend, and another big love of mine is eating a little bit there. You know, I took my grandmother's advice, manja manja, and when I came across in a cookbook actually, the story, or one of the stories of the possible legend of panettone, Tony's bread, pan di Tonio.
Oh, yeah.
I fell in love with the story, and the story's about a very wealthy nobleman from Milano whom I named Angelo, and he's traveling through this little town, And it's where Tony is the baker. And Tony's a very good baker, but he makes very simple country breads like these, you know, with just very unrefined flour. But Tony had a beautiful daughter whom I named Serafina. And Angelo fell in love with her. Well, Tony was very protective of his daughter. And Angelo asked the three old ladies, the Zie,
They're
right?
my favorites in the story. I love them. They're wise.
They're very wise,
Yes.
and also you never go to an Italian village where you don't see all the old ladies singing together.
In
and
their
I
little
did
black
them as
dresses.
and I did them as one big shape.
Yeah.
You know, because they all just
That was clever. That was clever.
one person.
They look like one big panettone.
That's right. But anyway, what Angelo did was he found out that Tony wanted to be the most famous baker in the world. So when he got back to Milano, he sent him all these rich ingredients like eggs and honey and milk and raisins and lemons and oranges.
Nothing a peasant would have, right?
Nothing a peasant would have, right. It was all very, very expensive stuff. So Tony put all those ingredients into his bread flour and ended up with Panettone. And he ended up, as you said, you know, only one piece was left, and he put it in the flour pot.
And there it was.
And there it is.
Well, that's one folk tale, but now I've got one for you.
Okay.
It is also said that this bread, because of its shape, resembles the church domes of Milan.
Oh, really? I hadn't heard that one. That's great.
And now, if you really thought about just the word panettone, that means a big bread.
Right,
Which certainly panettone can be. I mean, even bigger than that sometimes.
Oh, yes, right. Exactly.
And I think it's really sad that now this tradition is dying out in Italy, don't you?
That's really too bad.
Women don't make that anymore.
They all go to Mota or one of the other big bakeries and buy it. Even though that's very good, it doesn't have the same thing as homemade bread.
Right.
Now, this is another bread, but this is what I do. This is pane pugliese. There's a legend with this as well, and that is this bread is so precious to the people of Puglia that if you waste even one little crumb of bread,
we better get those.
Yes, we better, because you have to spend a year in purgatory for every crumb that you waste.
Yeah.
And I make that. My sister Judy makes panettone. I've never baked it, so.
Well, you know, you wouldn't want to waste a crumb of that when you've beaten it either.
I'm anxious to cut into it.
You need to come nella cucina, where I'm going to show you how to make this classic bread from Milan called panettone. There are as many ways to make panettone as there are stories surrounding that bread's origins. And you know, the really important thing to remember about making panettone is that you want to do it in a mold that has a very high side. So whether you do it in a flower pot or a coffee can, you're going to still make the traditional bread known as panettone. And today I want to make my version for you, because every city in northern Italy claims to have the original recipe for panettone, and whether you add nuts to it or you add fruit, well, that's a matter of choice. And today I want to show you my version. And it starts with grapes that have been dried. These are uve, or raisins. And now, by themselves, they're just raisins. But when you add grappa, well, they become pretty special. And grappa is really an Italian liqueur that's made from the skins of grapes and even the twigs. And this has a pretty potent smell as well as a taste, but I like to put the grappa on the grapes, and then it marinates, and I let it sit for about 6 hours or even overnight. And when I add that to my bread, I've got a very special panettone indeed. So, if you want to do it my way, then put some grappa over your grapes and then let it marinate about 6 hours or overnight. And really, when I make this bread, I start the day before, because there are several steps here that we have to go over. But you could make it in a day if you want to stay home and spend the time to do it. So I'm going to let these marinate. And then, to begin the bread, you have to start like you start with a lot of breads in Italian cooking, with a sponge. And a sponge is made with nothing more than some yeast and water and flour. And here I've got some warm water, about, a quarter of a cup. So that goes in the bowl. And then I'm going to add, a teaspoon or so of dried yeast. So that goes in. And then I just want to let that proof. So you want that to become spongy or milky looking. So you want to let it sit around for about, 10 minutes. And then when it is, you can add your flour. And here I have half a cup of unbleached flour. So that goes in. And then we get very Italian and just mix that up, making a sponge with your fingers. And I'm getting a little sloppy, but that's okay. So you want a pretty, loose dough here, and mix it well so that you don't have any lumps of flour left in the dough. And then you want to cover that. And then you want to let that rise overnight, or at least 6 hours, but it's better if you let it rise overnight. And then it'll look something like this, you see. And this is my risen sponge, and you see how nice and fluffy that is, and all the air bubbles that are in this. Now, why is this important? This is important because this helps to give the flavor to the bread, and it also helps that bread reach that dome shape. So that's my sponge. Now, what else do I need for panettone? Well, to be authentic, we've got to use eggs and butter and sugar. This is a very heavy kind of a yeast dough. So in a large bowl, after you have that sponge risen, you want to put eggs. And here I've got 4 egg yolks. So that goes in. And then 2 whole eggs. And then butter. And I've got about 5 tablespoons of butter. And you want that at room temperature. So that goes in. And then vanilla, because I like vanilla in mine, and I'm going to add, about a tablespoon. And then some water, about 1/4 cup of water. And then, 3/4 cup of sugar. That goes in. And then, that's when I add the grappa. So now, here are those raisins that I've had marinating for a while, you see. And I'm just going to squeeze on them, because I want to get all of that grappa out. I don't want to waste a drop. And so now I can take that liquid, and that goes in the bowl. And I'm going to save the raisins to add later on. All right, so now that's my wet mixture, and I want to get that beaten up fairly well. So using a whisk, or if you want to use a hand mixer, that's fine too. I just like to do things the old-fashioned way, and if I were in Italy, I'd probably be using a wooden whisk. So get this well blended. You want all that butter and the eggs and the sugar well mixed together. And this is going to take you, a few minutes by hand, maybe about 3 or 4 minutes to get that nice and fluffy, or if you're going to use a hand mixer, it isn't going to take as long as that, just a couple minutes. So get it well mixed. That looks pretty good. And now we can add the sponge. And here it is. And I like to just get it in there with my hands, because now I am going to use my hands. So the sponge goes in, and now I want to work that and really work it in to the eggs and the sugar and all the other things that I have in here. So break that sponge up, and really this is now where you want to put your electric mixer down, because it really is better to do it with your hands. So mix it well, and then you can add your flour, and I'm going to be using about 4 or 4.5 cups of unbleached flour. I like to use unbleached flour, and unbleached flour usually has a higher gluten content, and that's good for this recipe because we need to stretch the dough. So that looks pretty good. Now I'm going to add my flour. So here's my flour, and I may not put this all in at one time. It all depends on the size of the egg. I don't want a real dry dough here. So I'm going to put most of it in, save some just in case I need it. And that's part of the joy of Italian cooking. You have to go by feel, you see. So now what you want to do is get a ball that's fairly soft and something that you can take out of the bowl and then knead on a wood surface. So I would say that you would compare this dough to something like a Kugelhof or a French brioche kind of dough. It's a very rich, eggy kind of dough, and it's hard to move. So now I know that this dough is still too sticky and needs more flour. So I'm going to add this, the rest of it. And I think that that's going to give me just what I need. So as soon as you can take it out of the bowl as a mass, then you want to work on a well-floured surface. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now, before I take it out, I've got to flour my board. And that's the cardinal rule. Remember to have enough of a base of flour on that so that your dough is not going to stick. So out it comes. Now, we want to make this into a nice, smooth ball. So when you knead this, oh, I think I just lost a piece, but that's all right. When you knead this, really try to do it with the heel of your hand. And what we're trying to achieve here is something that's soft and elastic and doesn't have any bumps or grooves in it. So this is going to take you, oh, a good 5 or 10 minutes to do. And just let me add more of that because I don't want to lose this. This is really a nice rich dough. And now, this is going to require several risings, you see. That is the beauty of panettone. That's what gives you that wonderful texture to the bread, the fact that we are going to let it rise a couple of times. So you want to continue on like that. And then, after you're happy with the way your ball of dough looks, then you want to put it back into a bowl. And you want to make sure that you grease the bowl a little bit with some butter. Or in some places of Italy, they even use olive oil. So the choice is yours. So get a bowl ready. And here's mine. And it's just got a light coating of butter. And then in the dough goes, you see. And then you want to cover that. Cover it with a nice big piece of plastic wrap. And I like to use plastic wrap because that keeps the heat in the dough. And then you want to set that off to the side somewhere where it's warm to raise. And then that's going to take you, oh, about 6 hours at least. And then you want something that's about double in size. And here's one that's almost there. I'll just clean off my board a little bit here, add a little bit more flour. Now, when this dough rises, of course, it becomes a lot fluffier and easier to work with. And now this is the point where we add all that wonderful fruit that makes this characteristically a panettone. So flatten out the dough, and you see how nice and elastic this is. And now I want to put on here my fruits. And for that, I've got some fresh citron. Now, a lot of people don't know that citron by itself is a fruit. It belongs to the lemon family. And it's boiled, and then it's candied, and it's used in a lot of Italian desserts. And this is just one example. So here's what citron looks like, and here it is cut up in little pieces the way I'm going to use it for my panettone. So I've got about a half a cup of citron in a bowl. Now, if you can't find citron, then you could use candied peel as you find it in the grocery store, usually at Christmas time. But if you look real hard, I'm sure you could find that in a gourmet food store. So now I've got my citron in a bowl with about a tablespoon of flour. And then I'm going to add those raisins that we had in grappa. That's about 2/3 of a cup. And the reason I've got flour with this is so that these fruits do not sink to the bottom of the dough when it's cooking. So you want to flour them lightly. And then get that on the dough. But we're not finished yet because now some people add nuts, but I don't add nuts. But I like to use fresh orange rind. And here I've got the rind of one whole orange and also the rind of a whole lemon. So now that gets sprinkled on. And now you want to work that fruit right in to this dough. And it's really important to get into it because you want those fruits to burst right out of this. You want to see them coming out of the dough. So really work it. And if you've let this dough rise the way you should, this should be very easy to do. Now this is over 2 pounds of dough, and you'll be able to fill several molds with this. I'm going to divide this in half and put it into different kinds of molds. So keep going like that. And then you'll be able to cut the dough and to put it into a mold. And here, you've got a lot of choices. Here are some molds. You just move that out of the way for you to see. Well, there is our flower pot, but you could use, this is nothing more than a 2-pound coffee can. And this is an old lard mold that I had at home. So anything that meets your fancy that has a high side, but I think today I'm going to use the flower pot. So let me move this out of the way. And now to do this, I'm just going to break off some of that dough and use it in another pot. And now, if you're using the flour pot, what you want to do is make sure that you grease this very well. So have some melted butter and grease the whole pot very well, because you want to be able to get this out. And after you've greased it, then you want to take a little piece of wax paper, you see, and put it right in the base of the pot. Then you want to grease that too, so that the bread will come off of that. And then you want to give that a little flour. Put a little flour in the mold that you're using, and get that all the way around, all the way up the sides of the bowl. And that'll help to prevent the dough from sticking. And then it goes in the pot. And now you want this to rise about 2/3 of the way up until it looks like this, you see. This is all ready to go into the oven. And so when you're ready to bake, you want to make sure that that oven is on 400 degrees, because this is going to cook at a high heat first to allow this to come to its dome shape. And then you're going to reduce the heat. So this goes in the oven. And I already have one in here. Oh, that's hot. And there it is. And you see how nice it's risen. And how do I know this is cooked? I know it's cooked by sticking a skewer right down into the center. And if it comes out clean, I did it right. So I should be able to unmold this. And to unmold it, you just simply want to run a knife first around the mold, and then it should come out. And there is our shape, you see. And that's wonderful, done in a flour pot. But here's a version done in that lard can that I told you about. It still has that wonderful dome shape that reminds you of the churches in Lombardy. And if you want to do something different, you can make small versions of this. Here are a few pieces of dough rising in a little muffin tin to make little-sized panettone. And here's another idea into little things that you can put in the oven that are ironstone. So the possibilities are endless when making panettone. Just be sure to use the right mold. Ricordate tutti, to make traditional panettone, soak golden raisins overnight in some grappa liqueur or brandy. Make your sponge with yeast, warm water, and a little flour. Let it rise overnight if you can, or at least several hours. Then combine egg yolks and whole eggs, some butter, vanilla, a little water, sugar, and lastly, the grappa liquid from the raisins. Mix everything well. Now add the sponge and work it with your fingers. Add flour until you have a soft dough that's not too dry. Knead it and let rise for about 6 hours. Then knead it again and spread the dough flat. Now combine your raisins with citron pieces and a little flour. Work the fruit along with some fresh orange and lemon rinds into the dough. The dough should be bursting with fruit. Butter and dust 2 medium flour pots or any high-sided mold. Divide the dough between them and let rise until doubled. Bake your panettone first in a 400-degree oven for 5 minutes, then at 375 degrees for 10 minutes. Finally, reduce the heat to 350 degrees until the panettone is nicely browned. The baking of panettone has been a Christmas tradition in Italy, especially Milan, for centuries. And it isn't only at Christmas time that you can have panettone, but you can have it all year long. But let me show you some of the other special ways to have it at holiday time. Here's that impressive loaf of panettone that we made, and look at what nice height that has come to. And for this panettone, I took the top off and then hollowed out the crumb from the interior and stuffed it with ice cream. And here I've got pistachio ice cream, chocolate ice cream, and some almonds and maraschino cherries. And this I would just slice up into individual slices and then serve it as a dessert. And I think that that's a real novel way to have panettone. But then there's still the traditional, the old way to have it. And here's the loaf that I baked in my old lard can, and it too has risen to impressive heights. And when the head of the house serves panettone at Christmas time, he or she puts it under the arm and then cuts off a slice. And I want to cut off a slice for you, because when this is done in a household in Milan or any place else in Italy, the piece of panettone is then cut up into 3 individual slices, and the slices are passed around to every member of the family. Each one takes a bite, and that ensures that the coming year will bring good health and good prosperity. And what do you do when you have leftover panettone? Well, then you can make something called a bread cake. And here is a cake that's made with panettone that's been soaked in marsala and rum, and it has milk and eggs and spices and almonds. And let me scoop you up a little piece of this, because I think that this is a very festive thing to have at holiday time. And then, of course, remember the panettone that we made in our flower pot. And here it is, looking very impressive and beautiful. So, no matter what you choose to call it, Tony's bread or a big bread, panettone è un classico di Milano. And so until I see you nella cucina again, ciao.
Dear Tony, here are more supplies. Make as much bread as you can and send it to me. Then, when I send for you, I promise you will enter Milano with flags flying, and Serafina will be mine, your future son-in-law, Angelo. P.S. Please bake all the loaves in flower pots. My friends like the shape of that loaf the best.
Funding for Ciao Italia is made possible by a grant from Arricchio Cheese. For generations, the Big A, topped by an anchor, has been the symbol of our commitment to quality and consistency. Arricchio, classic Italian cheeses. And King Arthur Flour of Norwich, Vermont, celebrating their 200th anniversary with their Baker's Catalog. King Arthur Flour, dedicated to the pure joy of baking for 200 years.
Well, give us a couple of minutes to clean the kitchen, and we're off to Louisiana for some homegrown cooking. Today, game, the theme. Rabbit andouille gumbo and venison roast with gravy. So some rabbit sausage today at 2 o'clock, just in a couple of minutes this Saturday afternoon. Sunday afternoons are special here on Channel 32 with a lot of how-to shows. How to look out, take care of yourself. Starting off with the inspiration of painting. Steps on how to do wildlife and landscapes. That's at 12:30. Then the joy of painting, a wet-on-wet oil technique at 1. The collectors and how to find the exotic to the mundane. That, of course, is transcended to be something very special just for you. That's at 1:30 on the collectors. Home time, how to do it yourself at 2. This Old House with master carpenter Norm Abram at 2:30. Then the new Yankee Workshop and Shaker-inspired furniture projects at 3. Today's Gourmet at 3:30. The Victory Garden at 4 with tips on gardening from around the world. And then a new show, New Horizons in Bonsai, how to explore and perfect the bonsai technique of little trees. 4:30 Sunday afternoons, all here on Channel 32. Your chance to see and hear Nat King Cole, one of the great American pop singers. Highlights from the